Hello, everybody. Welcome back to A Few Minutes of History. I'm your host, Jake, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. I'm joined by Tom Petch. Tom, how are you doing?
I did very good, thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on. We set this up a while ago, and it's something that I'm really excited to talk about. It's the untold origin of the SAS, and
Indeed.
I think you bring a great, unique perspective onto it. Obviously, as a former SAS officer yourself, so I think what better person to talk about the origins of the SAS with.
Well, yeah, maybe. I will confess. When I was in the military, I did not know this. This came out of my subsequent career in the film industry. But actually, I'd been researching on a couple of SS projects and ended up in the archives, something I'd not done before. And that really led me to this journey of discovery, which ultimately led to this book.
No, absolutely. Well, that's quite interesting. That obviously something that you don't know while you are in service, and then afterwards you come out about it. So we'll get straight into it. Obviously, Dudley Clarke is a fascinating character and a very eccentric character by all accounts. And so, what is Dudley Clarke's story?
Yes, so he's a real, as you say, really interesting character. He's one of those guys who's very hard to categorize. I mean, if I briefly go through his biography, he was in service during the First World War, but he didn't manage to fight. He first of all joined the Royal Artillery. But he was too young. He was 16 in the outbreak of war. He tried to get to France. He actually stowed away on a boat with battlefield casualty replacements, unbelievably, trying to get front line, got caught, got sent back to the UK. He then joined the Royal Flying Corps, which saw him sent out to Egypt, which is really important, as we subsequently know in the origins of the SAS story, that he was in Egypt when Lawrence of Arabia was running around with the Arab revolt against the Turks. So he saw that insurgency. He actually wanted to join Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia had a small air force called X Flight, which was a proto-special forces flight operating to support the Arabs who were supporting Allenby's advance up through Palestine. That's quite an old bit of history. But then, unfortunately, that campaign was very successful. Allenby took Damascus. And then they said they don't want him any more pilots. And by that time, Clarke was about to qualify as a Bristol Scout pilot. He qualified, but the war ended. So that was the end of his chance to get into the First World War. And then he had a very interesting interwar career. He did go back to the artillery. I think he found that dull. And also, as he said, when he arrived back in the mess, some colonel went, "Where's that guy been?" And someone else went, "Oh, he's been in the Royal Flying Corps." And that sort of marked his card, if you like, in the very, very Luddite interwar British military, which it was. So he just kept volunteering for different things, and he went off to a little known campaign in Morocco, which was a Berber insurgency led by a guy called Abdul Karim. And the thing about Abdul Karim, he's another bit of history not many people know about. But he was the guy who inspired people like Mao Zedong and Che Guevara. He was the most successful insurgency leader of the 1920s. He led the Berbers against both the Spanish and French forces in northern Morocco and defeated both of them. He was ultimately captured, but for many years he ran rings around them. Clarke saw that. He also was later on at the start of the Palestine Arab revolt, so the Intifada, what we know as now as the Arab-Israeli conflict, started in the 1930s, and Clarke was there and saw that. So the outbreak of the war, he had a very, very interesting military career, and those experiences then led to, I think, what happened in the Second World War.
No, that is very interesting. Like you said, he's seen the likes of Lawrence of Arabia and all these other campaigns going on, and I very imagine that he's taken little bits of each one and sort of putting them into his own just notes and diary, and potentially thinking there's something could happen here if I need to do this in the future. These are the best points of each one. I feel like that's probably something that Clarke was thinking, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And he had a very creative mind. He was, I often say his brother Tibby went on to become an Oscar-winning screenwriter. I think Clarke was in that vein. He loved vaudeville. He loved plays. He would have, had he not been in the military, I think, been in that world as a writer, creative person. And so when the Second World War broke out, one of the things that inspired him in the Second World War was he'd lost a lot of friends in the First World War, though he did not fight. The people he joined up with who were older than him died. Lots of them died. He had a photograph from school And of the cadets that were in that photograph in, what would it be, 1914, half of them are dead, including the sergeant instructor who he had, who died at Gallipoli. So that inspired him at the start of the Second World War to basically think there's another way of doing things. Rather than frontal assaults and a lot of what we'd seen in the First World War, could we fight the Germans in a different way? And he called this idea subliminal methods. And sort of a little bit by chance, but also by design, he was recruited by a man called Jack Dill, who was a general he had worked for in Palestine. Jack Dill was aware of his talents, and Jack Dill took over, at the time of Dunkirk, Jack Dill took over as the head of the British Army, basically, which is called the chief in charge of the General Staff. And Jack Dill asked Clarke to work for him. And then Jack Dill was there at the end of the Dunkirk evacuation going, what are we going to do now? I mean, Churchill's making this speech saying, wars are not won by evacuation. And Jack Dill's in the office and sunsetting on the day after the Dunkirk evacuation. Turns to Clarke, goes, how are we going to get back across the channel? And Clarke has this idea. His idea. He calls it subliminal methods. The idea that you can use basically insurgency groups, which he's seen the Arabs do. He's seen the Berbers do. He was actually born in South Africa, and the name he chooses for his concept is the Commandos. The Commandos were Boers, who were an insurgency outfit who rode around in ponies and gave the British the run around in the veldt. So on that evening, he just turns to Jack Dill, and goes, well, how about we have our own commandos? We send them across the channel. We can attack the German army, and that will dissipate their strength while they're preparing to come the other way. Because obviously the threat at that point is the Germans have just defeated France and will come across the channel. And Dill loves that idea. He takes it to Churchill the following day and the Chief of General Staff. And by lunchtime the following day, he's in business. He comes back as, Commander, Clarke, you're on. Your commandos are on. They're commissioned.
So what's next then? Obviously, he's been told that he's on, but does he have men in mind to lead the commandos, or to be the fist of the commandos? Does he have anyone in mind for that?
No, and that is a problem, because one of the stipulations when the commandos are created, Dill comes back. He says, right, you've got the commandos, you can do what you like, but you cannot weaken the home defence force. So he's not allowed to recruit from regular units. And in a funny way, that feeds into the special forces as well, because the only units he can recruit from are what are called the independent companies. And these are territorial armies. So territorial is a part-time soldier. He's not a full-time soldier. And they've had a really bad time in Norway, where they were sent over very ill-prepared, and they've been messed up by German ski troops and stuff like that. And they're kind of licking their wounds up in Scotland. But as luck would have it, he goes up there to start recruiting and bumps into two officers he knows, one of whom he worked with in a force called the Transjordan Frontier Force. So we're going back a bit in history. Between the wars, he rode around Arabia in this force that used to hunt down Arab raiding parties. This is interwar. And this officer and him agree to recruit from these independent companies. So they get the best, they're basically civilians in uniform, in uniform, put them together, create a commando unit. And it's a real hodgepodge outfit. They don't have any weapons, proper weapons. They're scrambling for kit. He sets up an HQ in a female friend of his house in Eaton Terrace. The entire staff are female, because and outside Whitehall, because he thinks that's a way of protecting it and keeping it secret. And then 3 weeks later, this outfit with a bunch of RF crash boats, which are boats that are designed to rescue downed pirates, but they're very fast, shoot across the channel. This is 3 weeks after Dunkirk, and raid Latuke. And they're in there throwing grenades into German officers and carrying out the first British Special Forces operation of the Second World War.
And how successful is that? Is it something where Churchill hears about it and goes, yeah, I'm happy with that, keep going?
Well, yeah, this is where there's a dichotomy here. There's a split between what Churchill wants and what Clarke's ideas are. So Clarke's ideas are, the idea of subliminal methods are that the impact is, if you like, the publicity, not the actual operation. Clarke actually, throughout the war, and I'd include the SAS operations, doesn't really care whether the operation is successful. What he wants is some big punch that he can then use to exaggerate the strength of our forces. So the Latuke raid for him is great, because, there's British soldiers, in a hotel, blowing up a hotel, running around in France. And he has the press release for that ready to go before he gets back to the UK. He actually goes over there. Unfortunately, that really annoys Churchill, because they arrived at the cabinet arrive with the Evening Standard before Churchill's had a report or even knows the raid's gone in.
Wow.
And they've all got the news. So he's furious, absolutely furious. Of course, the press love it. The Times is going, if we'd had more of this during the campaign in France, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in now. So there is a split between high command, which is Churchill, and his right-hand man, who's a man called Pug Ismay, who do not like these small, what they call pinpricks. And Clarke, this is his concept of operations. And that becomes a struggle throughout Special Forces history, throughout the Second World War. That idea of what Clarke wants to do, which is small raiding groups, and what Churchill wants to do, which is massive, great outfits going across the Channel and smashing stuff up, or going into the Mediterranean and smashing stuff up.
That's really interesting. I don't know. I always thought Churchill would have been all over something like this, where any sort of anything that you can do against the Germans is good. And to find out actually he's quite not against it, but isn't as keen on it as you maybe thought he would be. It's quite an interesting thing.
Well, he's not keen on the concept of smashing up the Germans, but it's the scale of it. So, for example, where the Commandos go wrong, quite shortly after that, the Germans invade the Channel Islands, and Clarke's outfit is not really ready. As he said, they need a bit more prep before they raise the curtain on a big operation. We're talking civilians. They're borrowing Tommy guns. In the first raid, one doesn't know how to use it. So the first raid nearly gets compromised, nearly goes wrong, because as he cocks his Tommy gun, the magazine falls off. 2 German sentries hear the clatter and open fire, and that nearly screws up the whole thing. So we're not talking professional soldiers here. They have no selection. They don't understand Special Forces training. They're an ad hoc outfit. So Churchill forces Clarke and the Commandos to go across the Channel and raid the Channel Islands, and they're really not up to the job. I mean, the Navy send them into Sark, which the Germans have not invaded. So one unit goes on an island that's still in our hands, and the rest of them, some of them can't swim. And also, no one's assessed the tidal range in the Channel Islands. It's a complete mess. And that makes Churchill furious, because when that raid comes back, he goes, right, this is not happening. We're not having these pinpricks. What we need is a proper big organisation. And he gives command of the Commandos to an admiral, a First World War admiral who is quite well known for the Zeebrugge raid. So this now becomes, what the Commandos eventually become is big battalions grouped into brigades. And Clarke is kind of a little bit out of the job, but, and this is the but, at that point he has created 2 Commando, and 2 Commando are a parachute commando. And the reason he's created them is because he's realised that, okay, going across the Channel, we're going in these boats, great. What would be a lot better is to go across by parachute, come back by submarine, because that would really mess with the Germans, because they cannot protect everything in France. Yes. If you can fly over, drop in. So we're thinking a long way ahead to what the SAS actually ends up doing in 1944 and what the SOE start doing, in 42, late 41, early 42. So he's way ahead of the game there. But the problem with 2 Commando is that essentially, again, as it gets bigger, Churchill wants 2,000 men, he wants a flying tank, and quite quickly the army get fed up with this. They're going, look, you've got all these soldiers, they're in this special force, but they're not going to get used. We want them back. And the RAF, we've now trained 500 parachutists. Go, no, you can't have them back. We've trained 500 people. It's taken us 3 months to do this. It's a huge drain on our resources. We want to keep them. And so that unit, which is called 2 Commando, gets transferred from the Commandos to the RAF, placed under command of the RAF. And as it does that, because staff officers hate the name Commandos, they change the name back to Special Service Troops, which is what any irregular unit's called. And because it's an air unit, it gets called the Special Air Service. So in November 1940, the Special Air Service is created in the UK.
Interesting, very interesting. So they get transferred to the RAF. Then how does Clarke sort of get hold of them again? And where is Clarke at this point? Is he in Egypt yet, or?
No, yeah. So that's what happened. So that's in November. This unit, which is now called the SAS, carries out a parachute demonstration, which is very successful in December 1940. So this is well ahead of the narrative we all know. They carry out a parachute demonstration down on Salisbury Plain, and they pretend to be German parachutists. And the people they're attacking, the people that they're doing this exercise against, are the troops of General Claude Auchinleck. Now, anyone who knows the story knows General Claude Auchinleck will create the SAS. So this is his first eyes on this new special force. And they play German parachutists, a very popular demonstration. And the SAS come over the drop zone to see, hundreds of staff officers, generals, all milling around on the drop zone. And they drop into the middle of them. They can't even see the enemy at this point. The enemy are British soldiers, defending the River Till. And a group of them, because they can't get off the drop zone very easily, a group of them decide to go to, this is a little troop, it's called B Troop, SAS. They go to the staff officer's car park and nick a staff car and a motorbike, which turns out to be the Crown. This is very SAS, by the way.
Yeah, it's going to
Crown
say.
Prince of Norway's staff car and the motorbike, and burn off, and nobody sees them go, and they get behind the defenders and take the bridge in Shrewsbury, which is their target, before anyone's any the wiser. The whole exercise sort of winds up with the SS have got behind the enemy, they've taken this bridge, and the defenders are completely derailed. So this is seen by Cloud Adlet, which has got to feed into his thinking of what happens in North Africa. But anyway, so the story is complicated, but at that point also that's basically the last thing that Clarke does in the UK, because as I said, the commandos are now under command of an admiral. Clarke's really out of a job, and there's another general he's worked for, again in Palestine, and that general's called General Archibald Wavell, and he is commander of Middle East, and he's having a problem because now the Italians have entered the war. Basically, Mussolini thinks the Brits are going to get knocked out of the war. This will be it. So he's basically going to carry out a grab of the British colonies in North Africa, which goes wrong because Hitler does not invade England. And now there's going to be a war between Italy and us in North Africa. And Archibald Wavell urgently signals Whitehall, says, get Clarke out here. He's very well aware of who Clarke is. He's aware of his Machiavellian tendencies. He's aware of his thinking. And Wavell has also created his own special force, which is called the Long Range Desert Group. So Clarke flies out to Africa, to Cairo, to work for Wavell. And in parallel to him doing that, this UK Special Air Service unit gets an operation that the RAF get tasked to knock out an aqueduct in southern Italy. So as Clarke arrives in Africa, the SAS, the real SAS in England, are tasked to do this operation in Italy. Now, the thing about that operation, which is called Operation Colossus, is logically that would come from North Africa, because to get to the heel of Italy, where this aqueduct is, you'd probably stage that operation from Egypt through Crete, which is still in our hands. But they don't. They fly from RAF Mildenhall. But Clarke thinks that's a really useful thing, because I can pretend the SAS are operating in Africa already. I can pretend, because when that real operation happens, I just need to create the illusion they're over there, which he does. So he starts this big deception in North Africa that we have an SS brigade operating in North Africa. And even better than that, the Italians already think we're using parachute troops, because the Long Range Desert Group, which is this special force that goes by truck behind and navigates behind the Italian lines, sometimes the Italians think those are parachute units. And we capture a diary of an Italian officer that says, last night, parachute troops landed near my position. So Clarke's given that diary by British intelligence, puts those two things together and goes, I can fake this, which is what he does. And then when that real operation goes in, everybody, from the Italians to the Germans, thinks there is a parachute unit called the SAS in North Africa. There isn't. There just isn't. It's just complete fiction.
Fascinating. So it's really interesting. Clarke, he seems the absolute master of deception already, and the Germans and Italians have fully just fell for it.
He's lucky also because Archibald Wavell is also very into deception. I mean, he creates the Long Range Desert Group, this special force, his personal special force, which is created by a guy called Ralph Bagnall. And really, you can't tell the story of the creation of David Stirling's SAS without understanding what the Long Range Desert Group is and does. That is a unit that can, based on the pre-war desert explorers, centered around this guy, Ralph Bagnall. And they essentially go behind Italian lines. But Ralph Bagnall's idea, when he pitches that to Wavell, says, oh, look, I'm going to create this special force. His idea is to give them early warning in case the Italians or later the Germans come through the desert. Wavell's concept is that is a deception force. He sponsors the Long Range Desert Group because he knows very well that long-range raiding behind the Italian lines will cause some problems. They'll start having to pull troops out the front line. They won't know how big that force is. They won't even know what the force is. And like I'm saying, they sometimes think it's a parachute unit. So that deception's already up and running. So Clarke kind of falls into the right place, really. He is a deceiver. And really the SS are born out of another thing, which is the first job that the first job Wavell gives Clarke is actually to create a deception about an invasion of East Africa. And that goes so well, Clarke realizes he can dupe the Italians about fake units. And then straight after that, he dupes them about the SAS. And this becomes a massive thing during the war. It eventually becomes an operation called Operation Cascade, where you don't just have fake SAS, you have fake tank units, fake amphibious units, fake RAF units. It eventually becomes an entire army. By the end of the war, 1943 actually, we have something called 12th Army. That's an entirely fictional army. Those are thousands of troops that do not exist.
That's fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. So obviously, when the first SAS operation goes in, is that a success as well? Is that a tick in the box for the unit?
It is, and in my opinion, it is. But again, in Britain, it isn't. I mean, they do a really good job. I mean, given that we've never tried this, we've converted Whitley bombers using long-range field tanks. The RAF have navigated to a night target. I don't want to be rude about the RAF. They did drop quite a lot of them in the wrong valley. Any pilots out there, just saying. It's a big hand, small math problem. They in fact dropped all the explosives virtually the wrong valley. But anyway, there you go. Some pilot will post on this saying, it's really hard to navigate an target. But as a former guy who just jumped out of airplanes. Anyway, let's move swiftly on from the problems of the RAF's navigation. But to be fair to the RAF, they do manage to get most of the unit in the right place with some explosive. They have to improvise because they don't have enough explosive. They actually use the locals. So when they parachute in, local farmers first of all, they lock them up in a bar. Then they realize they need some help finding and carrying explosive, which they start off doing by forcing their Italian civilian prisoners at gunpoint to find explosive. But then the Italians turn around and go, well, no, this is the most interesting thing that's ever happened here.
Yeah.
So we'll do this willingly because we'll have something to talk about the rest of our lives. So they do this operation, they detonate the explosives, they destroy the aqueduct. It is 100% successful in its target. They are all captured because, and they would have been captured because they don't know this, but their evacuation plan is a submarine, but the submarine is being compromised, which means its position was given away because, sorry, I'm being really rude about the RAF now. One of the RAF pilots sent in clear, it was crashing, basically had an engine failure. And he randomly chosen the rendezvous with the submarine as the place he was going to crash land and ask for rescue there. So that compromised the submarine, which then had to report. So they would never have got out had they made it. But they didn't make it anyway. They got captured because Mussolini went mad. He thought, these insurgents have landed in southern Italy. He sent everyone down there to catch them. So they had no chance of getting out of the area. And the reason actually that Mussolini went mad and the real success of this operation was what Clarke was up to. So he not only pretended that we had the SAS in North Africa. He pretended that SAS unit in North Africa was training Ethiopian insurgents. So those are Abyssinians. Mm-hmm. Now, Mussolini had carried out a massive genocide in Ethiopia, persecuted, killed, raped thousands of people. And Clarke staged a photo shoot outside Cairo with a guy posing as an Ethiopian parachutist saying the SAS are training these guys and they're coming to southern Italy. Brilliant. So the impact of that operation, and I don't think anyone really realised this at the time, apart perhaps from Clarke, was catastrophic on the Italian and particularly Mussolini's competence. I mean, the idea that we could get parachute units into southern Italy, drop Abyssinians, Ethiopians there, and start an insurgency. It's not actually even a very real threat, but he's playing into the mind of a paranoid dictator.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, that was a very long answer. Operationally, it was a complete success. For Clarke and for strategic deception, it was an enormous success. I don't think Mussolini recovered from that shock. And if you look at the press cuttings, contemporary press cuttings, it went around the world. The problem, again, actually comes back to Churchill's desk. When that hit Churchill's desk, that raid, he had not been told about the operation. And he absolutely went nuts. He called in his right-hand man, Pagis May, and said, what is going on? I mean, there's no, you don't have to dress up the letter, the memo that he sent him. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. What had happened, to be fair, was Pagis May had sent him the details, as had the admiral commanding the Commandos, of the raid. But let's face it, Churchill's pretty busy. He's running a war. He just hadn't read it. And also... No one in the UK, in Britain, had understood the import of what Clarke was doing. They did not understand the strategic nature of special forces. because let's face it, this is the beginning of 1941. They didn't understand the enormous impact that we now understand that sort of operation can have. And they were completely blindsided. Churchill basically banned it. He said, never, given the parachute threat to the UK from German parachutists, never do this again. That's what he said. And the SAS in Britain were disbanded as a result, turned into the first parachute regiment, which was a more infantry unit than special force.
So obviously they are then disbanded. What's Clarke's thinking at this time? Is he excited because he can potentially grab a hold of now what is a fictional unit in North Africa and turn them into a functioning unit? Is that his thinking, or? Well,
Clarke's thinking is he's pedaling very fast in a lot of areas. Rommel gets to North Africa, and this causes the British an enormous number of problems. So essentially, we were on a real roll against the Italians. We could have knocked them out of the war in North Africa. We did not. We went to Greece, and then everything comes off the rails. And Rommel basically arrives with a couple of panzers and just turns the whole thing around. And that becomes essentially the narrative for the rest of the war for the British, is trying to pin Rommel into a corner, which we're never able to do. But the first thing that Clarke does when Rommel gets there is Rommel just basically drives through our front line. He goes hell for leather for Tobruk, which is a port, which is strategically very important to us. And Clarke gets called in by way of, goes, what do? We can't stop Rommel. And Clarke goes, the only thing I can do is fake some tank units. So he rush jobs, fakes 3 Royal Tank regiments, which actually continue through the rest of the war. These are fake tank regiments. But he's rushing to build. He is by now faking the SAS. So the SAS are faked by a unit called K Detachment, Special Air Service. K Detachment are a bunch of engineers who do things like build balsa wood gliders. They throw bundles out of airplanes pretending to be parachutists. They dress up fake bombers. They're a little outfit like that. And they then turn their hand to turning out fake dummy tanks. And they manage to get 150 out the door, get them up behind the front line when Rommel's approaching Tobruk. They build a fake jetty in Tobruk to make it look like it's better defended. They Clarke realizes they don't have enough tanks, but because the Germans hide their tanks in tents, so their tanks are called panzers. They hide them in better tents. Clarke thinks, well, if the Germans do that, they might believe we do that. So he tie-dyes a load of British tents black, puts them behind the front line, and creates effectively 300 tanks. And Rommel stops his advance. And Clarke assesses he stopped his advance, possibly because of his deception. You can never confirm that, but he does stop his advance before Tobruk. And obviously, when you're advancing, the thought in your mind is, if the enemy have got reserves of tanks, that's a big threat. And Rommel at that point was right. He was winging it. He was right on the end of his supply line. He's right on the end of his fuel supply. He was not supposed to be attacking. I mean, German High Command are going mad. They're going, why is he? He was supposed to be defending, and he's gone and invaded Egypt. Well, what's going on there? They go mad.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like you said, Rommel's right on the cusp of everything that he could possibly be doing. His supplies are stretched. The Germans aren't giving him any reinforcement, so he's very much struggling. And like you said, the threat of potentially 300 British tanks is a massive one, and it's one that you can't take the risk of. So, the deception obviously does something. It's going to play into it, because German reconnaissance is also going to be doing what we're doing. It's going to be looking at what's out there, and to see potentially 300 tanks is a massive thing. So credit.
Those tents, the Luftwaffe bomb those tents, so they're obviously convinced that those are a real threat.
Yeah, exactly that. So obviously Rommel's advance stops. Where does Sterling sort of come into this then at this point?
So that's really interesting, because obviously Sterling comes out of Clarke's UK initiative, because Sterling is a commander. So David Sterling is a commander. So is Jock Lewis, so is Paddy Mayne, so is William Fraser, so is Karen Mather, so is George Jellicoe. So all the people we associate with the future of British Special Forces are born out of Clarke's Commando initiative initially. So these guys have all volunteered because they're fed up with their units, or they think there's a better way to fight the war. And the Commandos are very, very popular in Britain. The idea that you can join this dagger raiding party thing. Unfortunately, by the time they kind of get going, and in particular, Sterling is sent out to North Africa. So there's a kind of, it's very organic. This is not a plan. Clarke doesn't have a plan for this. It all comes out of what happens. And the commandos, Churchill wants to create bigger commando units, as I said, big groupings, brigade size. So a brigade is basically roughly, say, 2,000 men. And he wants 2,000 men going around smashing stuff up. We're thinking here of what happens, and we know happens in Dieppe later in the war. But he sends a group of them out to North Africa under command of a guy called Bob Laycock. And that includes 8 commando, who are called the Bluebirds, who are the members of Whites, who I've mentioned, people like Sterling and that lot. And they arrive in North Africa, but by now the Luftwaffe are basically dominant. You can't really go by sea. And they try, and they get blown up, and they realize, the commanders realize commando raiding by sea is really out. So they don't have any vehicles. They're no use to Middle East Command in the desert because they can't drive around. Wavell actually says, I don't even know why we've been sent these people. The operation they were supposed to carry out, which was to invade Rhodes, that's over because Greece has fallen and Crete gets parachuted on, and that falls. So these are just useless units. They get basically used to plug the leaking dike of the British collapsing British forces in the Mediterranean. So they're sent to places like Lebanon. 11 Commando, which includes Paddy Mayne and William Fraser, gets sent there. Those are 2 officers who will join the SAS. And then 8 Commando are really the instrumental ones because they end up in Cairo, basically. They're fed up. They end up partying in the Shepherd's Hotel. Quickly, Shepherd's Hotel is my great-great-great-grandfather's hotel. There you go. That's a personal link to the story. He created that. So they go to, and Shepherd's Hotel is renowned worldwide as being a den of iniquity, essentially.
I think it's the one place I think everyone wishes they could go to during the war.
You can't go there because it got burnt down. But it was essentially exactly like that. It was basically it had a barman called Joe the Swiss Solomon, who I think is the template for Ricks of Casablanca. It was that sort of place. So 8 Commando were fed up and also all have private incomes, virtually all of them, nearly all of them. Jock Lewis, I don't think, does, but the rest do. Actually, he might be wealthier than we think. Anyway, they all just go there and party and drink, and that leads to them running into Clarke. It leads to Sterling running to Clarke. But initially, the real sort of instigator of parachute operations is Jock Lewis, and he's slightly different to the rest of 8 Commando officers in that he's actually incredibly fit. He's an Oxford rowing blue. He's an incredibly good coach. He coached the Oxford rowing team to victory over Cambridge, breaking a 7-year run. And back in those days, the rowing race, the Oxford Cambridge rowing is a bit like the FA Cup. Thousands of people watched it. It's huge. I mean, he put it all that way. The celebration for that ended up with him and thousands of people in Piccadilly Circus and him hanging a Fiora statue and shouting through his boating horn. So you can imagine the size. He's on the front page, I think, of Lady. Like, he's a bit of a celeb. He's an athlete. Everyone knows who he is. And he realizes that he's frustrated. He realizes the commanders are washed up. He doesn't really want to go back to what he was doing before, which is a regular guards unit. And he basically goes to Bob Laycock and goes, look, can I parachute? Can I trial parachuting? And the weird thing about that is Bob Laycock is in the same headquarters as Clarke. So Clarke is helping Bob Laycock and the Commandos because he's faking SAS operations to augment the threat of the Commandos. He's carrying out fake SS operations on Rhodes and Crete, and he's pretending the SS have got gliders they haven't. And so when that happens, this is never. I have no actual physical evidence through all the diaries and memos, but I'm pretty certain that what happens is he turns to Bob Laycock and goes, "Can this guy get some parachutes?" Because what then happens is Jock Lewis is sent up to Fouquet Airfield, which is a K detachment SAS base where they are faking gliders. They actually turn them into bombers at that point. And he carries out a parachute training jump. And at the same time as that happens, Sterling turns up. And again, we don't know exactly how Sterling turns up on that parachute training jump. And Jock Lewis is annoyed. He goes, well, why is Sterling here? And Sterling says, I'm carrying out some operation in Syria. Now, the interesting thing about Sterling saying that, of course, is Clarke is carrying out fake SAS operations in Syria. So he's clearly spoken to Clarke, because otherwise he wouldn't know that. So this sort of organically, this conference is organic and accident, a happy accident, because Clarke really wants real people jumping out of airplanes. And the moment the commandos go, we want a parachute, he goes, brilliant, that's it, do that.
That's fascinating. Like you said, it's a happy accident, and it's everyone coming together at the right time, being in the right. It's one of them, isn't it? You know, the right bar, the right time.
Right, absolutely.
Or, you know,
I think Sterling gets a bit of a hard time now, which I think is unfair, because I think he was the person who saw the whole thing. Even Jock Lewis, I don't think saw the strategic picture the way Sterling did. And the reason Sterling did was because he was sitting next to Clarke, and he was in Shepherds. Clarke lived in Shepherds. And there's a person in this story who doesn't ever get mentioned, but Countess Ranfurly, Hermione Ranfurly, who's a woman who was working for the SOE she's working as secretary for the SOE office in Cairo. She was basically spying on the SOE, who were corrupt in Cairo. And she was doing that while working out of the Sterling's flat. So David Sterling, Bill Sterling, and his brother Peter shared a flat. And she was basically working at night. She'd type up her transcripts at the same time Sterling was working with Clarke. And she was also one of Clarke's best friends. So there's this very tight-knit group, as you say. What's interesting also is that if you look at the actual physical evidence of what, because you've got to go to the archive and back this up, is that Sterling's pitch, so his first pitch for the SAS, is in Clarke's file. It's in the Abeen file. So him and Clarke clearly worked on this idea. And then the two of them, and this is the other thing that's in the record, the two of them go to General Headquarters for the first meeting about the creation of the real SAS. And that meeting is chaired by the head of military training in Cairo. And at that meeting, Sterling and Clarke explain what the Special Air Service is going to be. And interestingly, the main thing it's going to be is a training unit, because the main thing Clarke wants is parachutists falling out of the sky. I don't think he's as interested at that point as Sterling is in creating a real unit, as Sterling says in that meeting, with a special badge. Well, we all know the special badge comes along, but at that meeting, Clarke's got loads of special badges for the SS. He is a man of fiction. He is a man of fiction. And as I said, going all the way back to the very first Commando raid across the channel at Lutuke, it's all about the bang he can get for his buck. He wants small things that he can turn into bigger things.
I always do think that with Clarke, he loves the story, and like you said, if he wasn't in the military, he'd probably have worked in Hollywood or something like that, or theatre, because the story was always better than the actual event. if you will.
Well, but that's how he describes it. So his deceptions, he describes them as the story or the scenario. So he talks about them like film scripts or plays. So when someone says, "Hey, Clarke, can you fake the invasion of Crete?" Right? He goes, "Well, what's the story?" And his story is always targeted one thing. It's quite interesting because he doesn't really care actually how the whole deception works. What he cares about is the results. So you want the enemy to, so he always starts with, what do we want the enemy to do? We want them to reinforce Crete. Okay, fine. Then he comes up with the story. Then he comes up with the scenario. And then he comes up with the way he's going to sell that to the enemy, which is basically the treatment. I mean, it's all like a film, isn't it? He's coming up with this fiction. And then he tries and works out all the different angles, what he needs in terms of physical fake stuff, whether that's fake airplanes, fake amphibious landing craft, fake troops. And also, and how he can integrate special forces, because Clarke's concept of special forces is part of deception. The SAS, the SBS, the Commandos, he uses them to augment his deceptions. They're the same thing.
No, absolutely. So obviously, when Jock Lewis and Sterling do their jump and everything starts rolling, how does it then go from an idea to the actual, obviously the origin, where they become a physical unit? Is Clarke involved in that, or has it?
Clarke does not command the unit. Essentially, all special forces are commanded by the force commander. That's another thing Clarke sets up at the beginning of the war, which continues in North Africa. It's really important because, and I keep making this distinction actually, is that what people think is really important about the special forces, they're really tough, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, SAS, SBS, that it's the physical element that's the most important. And I'd argue that's probably not the most important. The most important fact is they're commanded at the highest force command level. So unlike regular units, because you've got tough regular units, you've got US Rangers, you've got Paras, all of that. The difference with a special force is it reports directly to the force commander, so their operations are strategic. Yeah. So the overall command of both the Long Range Desert Group and the SAS is with Archibald Wavell, and then later with Cloud Auchinleck. In fact, it's Cloud Auchinleck who commissions the SAS. So this fictional unit that Clarke's created, and then it's turned into a real unit by David Stirling and Jock Lewis. It's Cloud Auchinleck, same guy who saw the SAS parachute in Salisbury Plain, who at a meeting with Clarke and Stirling goes, you're on, yeah, you can have an SAS. And that's the start, because in order to create a real unit, you need to have, it needs to be commissioned by the general. So that's what happens there. And then it has a very difficult birth, because as we know, there's a big operation, and it's an attempt to knock out Rommel, knock him out of North Africa, and it's called Operation Crusader. And everyone backs it to the hilt. Cloud Auchinleck, Churchill sends all our new tanks out from Britain. That's quite a risky thing to do in late 1941. We really need them to defend the UK. He rushes them in a convoy through to Suez, and then this whole big operation, everything's thrown at the Germans and Italians, including the SAS. And the idea, and the very clever idea, which is probably Stirling's, is that the best thing to do is for us to knock out the Luftwaffe on the ground. And there we play into a very big problem that the British Army have, and the Allies have, which is that the Luftwaffe have got the Messerschmitt 109 fighter, which is a really good fighter, much better than anything we've got. And they're completely dominant over the battlefield. So you can imagine how hard it is to fight a battle when, if the Messerschmitts turn up, clear out our fighters, the next thing that happens, all the Stukas pile in. And that's just a disaster. So there's a guy in the 8th Army headquarters. Sorry, this is going to be a bit of an explanation, but it's quite important, because a guy in 8th Army or British Army headquarters in the front line called Sandy Galloway. And he hears about the SAS. He hears there's a parachute unit being created, and he hears that they can take out aircraft. And the moment he hears that, he's on the phone to Cairo going, how do I get more parachutists? Can you get me 200? Can you get me? How many can you get? What's the problem? Why can't you get me more parachutists? Because he sees this as absolutely the solution to all his problems. He's the right-hand man to the force commander. He's a guy called General Cunningham. And he's just got a headache. He knows the Luftwaffe, the moment they attack, and they're attacking in bad weather, they deliberately pick, the autumn. So it's going to be not that great. But he knows that when the sky's clear, he's going to have to deal with the Luftwaffe. And so he's a massive sponsor. And so this operation gets a big backing. Stirling, Lewis, Maine, and all of that are cleared to jump. And as we know from the story, Jock Lewis has invented a plastic explosive, which is very effective against aircraft, and they're all set to go. But as we also know, the weather on the night of the offensive is appalling. I mean, we're talking 34 mile an hour winds on the drop zone. And I don't think, because this was so new, they really have a picture of what that will do on a drop zone. It's horrific. When you land on a parachute, you've got to get the chute down. You've got quite a lot of kit attached to you. You're not, you land hard, and the first thing you've got to do is get that chute down, because if you can't get it down, it will literally rip you across the ground. It's like a great big sail. They do not understand, I don't think, because they jump anyway. They jump anyway, and it's a disaster. And so many of them get killed, captured. The weather's appalling. The long-range desert group actually try and do an enormous amount to rescue them. Jake Easton-Smith, who's a very famous long-range desert group commander who actually gets killed later in special forces operations in Greece, he does his best. He's out there for days. He breaks all the rules, trying to get the SS back, but they just don't get them back. They only get like 23 of them back. And really that, you'd think, would be the end of the SAS. Shall I just continue with the story because it's long?
Please. Yeah, absolutely.
So that really would have been the end of the SAS. They're licking their wounds. They're sent back. They're flown back. Or in fact, they're picked up, dropped off, and then sent back to Cairo. The only one who doesn't go back to Cairo is Stirling. He goes up to report this disaster to 8th Army, fully expecting. We have a saying in the military, it's called an interview without coffee. I don't know if there's an equivalent. It basically means one of those interviews you really don't want to have. So he's fully expected a complete bollocking. But as luck would have it, as he arrives at 8th Army HQ, the commander who he sees, called General Cunningham, is getting fired because he's screwed up so badly. And he's being replaced by the Auchinleck's right-hand man, Ritchie. Now, Ritchie is another fan of the SAS, as is Cloud Auchinleck. So suddenly he goes from being... He doesn't even get asked much about the raid. In fact, Ritchie says, "Do you have any trouble? I heard the word was quite bad when he arrived to take over." So he goes, "Oh yeah, it's a bit rough."
Just completely underplaying.
Yeah. At which point he gets out of there and flies back to Cairo in a boat. Going, "Oh, that was close." So the SS completely. There's so much of this goes on in the story. It's like they by luck they survived thanks to Rommel, who's completely tranced through the Eighth Army and given the. And at that point, then Cloud Alcolet, arrives back up at the front line, and Cloud Alcolet's a strange guy. He's a very good soldier. He's a hopeless political animal, which was why he ultimately gets fired. But I'd say he's another guy, a protagonist of Special Forces, because his background is Indian Army, Northwest Frontier. He fought in the Siege of Kut in the First World War. He understands the concept of like insurgency groups going against the enemy. He's a big fan of the Long Range Desert Group. And when he arrives up at the front line to fire Cunningham, everyone thinks we're going to, withdraw. The Germans have basically wiped out our tank force. Rommel has completely destroyed them. And at that point, there's the British Panzers, a British tank and the German Panzers are whirling in this storm. There's complete chaos. No one knows the front line. No one knows who's won or lost, apart from Rommel, who thinks he's won. And everyone in Britain is, all the British are running for Egypt. Everyone thinks we're not going to stop till we get back to El Alamein. Interesting hint there, El Alamein. Everyone's withdrawing. And Alcolet writes, well, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to attack. And everyone's like going, well, what? And he orders Ritchie, Cunningham, and then Ritchie, so when they're handing over, to use the long-range desert group to strike into Rommel's rear. And that is quite a turning point for British Special Forces because no one's really used a squadron. So a squadron group is, that's quite a lot of vehicles. It's probably about 70 men from the long-range desert group and send them into the Germans' rear to take out their supply line. And that is very clever of the Alcolet because the German supply line, as you've alluded to, his supply line, Rommel's supply line is long. It goes down the coast road. They aren't even at that stage running convoys. These are civilian drivers driving tankers up to supply the panzers. And when that long-range desert group operation goes off, they go in. They've got big trucks, like Ford trucks, Chevrolet trucks, with Lewis guns on. They cause absolute mayhem. They completely destroy the Germans' supply system. It shuts down for at least 2 days. And the impact on that on the front line is really bad. I mean, Berlin, who's Rommel's chief of staff and crew, go, our supply lines are completely being molested. We can't deal with this. And that is part of what goes wrong with Rommel's offensive, that he just can't really sustain this very chancy operation to get, up towards El Alamein, and he has to go backwards. And then I'm just talking on and on, but
it's
yeah. I'll just keep going. Then Alcolet goes, okay, so we've stopped him, and now we're going to go on the offensive. So Alcolet's a really aggressive guy, and it's the best time to go on the offensive is when you're bouncing the enemy. Basically, it's like football, when they're changing, when you go from defense to offense, that is the moment the defense is going to be weakest. And the Alcolet knows that, so he plans to bounce Rommel. And the idea that he comes up with is to use the long-range desert group to take out the airfields, the Luftwaffe airfields, the SAS have failed to take out. And he sends a signal up to, signal goes to 8th Armies, the long-range desert group, who are commanded by a guy called Guy Prendergast now. And he goes, look, we want you to get on the airfields, Luftwaffe airfields, take out the Luftwaffe. And Guy Prendergast, who is incidentally, before this operation, got drunk in Shepherd's with Sterling and talked about this very thing. So there you go. It's another massive coincidence. He goes, Guy Prendergast asks you to take out the airfields. And Guy Prendergast signals back and goes, no, I can't do that because the LRDG have had very bad experiences on airfields. They've had officers shot. The first Free French officer killed in the war was killed in an LRDG raid on an airfield. They've got big vehicles. They're vulnerable. They don't have the right explosives. And Guy Prendergast signals use the parachutists, and that is the start of what becomes the SAS. That order from Alcolet back to Guy Prendergast back, and then the SAS get flown up. And so then the Orc goes, okay, Ritchie and Sandy Galloway go, okay, get the SS up here, and they're ordered up here. So it's not a rogue operation. They're ordered by High Command to get up and join the LRDG.
And then obviously from there, it goes on, doesn't it, into what we know now. But I think arguably what I've taken away from that is that getting drunk in Shepherd's is probably the most important part of the North African campaign.
Absolutely. Everything happened in Shepherd's. All the deceptions. I mean, you should probably write a book on Shepherd's Hotel. Perhaps I should one day write a book on the history of Shepherd's Hotel and who stayed there. But yeah, everybody who was anybody stayed there, and that was the melting pot for this story really, and for Clarke's deception, because he actually used Shepherd's in deception operations. He later in the war, he fakes General de Gaulle staying there and stuff like that. So yeah, it is integral to the story.
So obviously, as things progress and the SAS, go on to raids and to other things, what's Clarke doing? Obviously, now that they're a fully functioning unit that are highly successful and doing what they're doing, what does Clarke do after all of this?
Well, yeah. So Clarke, to create the SAS, the fake SAS, he created something called A-Force, Airborne Force HQ. A-Force, and he actually posed as a sort of colonel in the parachute unit and stuff like that. And this A-Force, obviously now it's faking not just the SAS but tank units, and it basically becomes a centre for deception in North Africa, and it grows and grows and grows. It moves out of initially he works out of a bathroom in JHQ, converted bathroom in JHQ. It moves into a flat near Shepherd's, and then it takes over another flat. And by sort of 1943, this is a massive operation. This is an operation that deceives the enemy about our forces, but also runs a significant number of double agents hand in hand with Middle East intelligence. So Clarke is able to physically fake things. He's able to get the information about these fakes through double agents into the Axis command. His most important double agent is an operator called Cheese, who was actually once upon a time a real agent. And so this was in 1940. An Italian, Jewish Italian operative came over and wanted to defect and was picked up by Middle East intelligence. And then he was really hopeless. This guy was really hopeless, actually. He just was interested in women and money. And he was persuaded eventually by a guy called, by one of the Middle East intelligence operators, his handler, to go back to Italy with a radio the British built for him. So it was like a fake radio. So they didn't just give him a British radio because that would have blown the game. So he goes back to Rome and to tell them that he set up a spy ring in Cairo, which they believe. And that fake spy ring, which becomes codenamed Cheese, grows and grows. And that becomes the main way Clarke gets information into the Axis camp. He can directly communicate with Italian intelligence, who completely believe this agent. Throughout the war, and the Germans use him more and more and more. And his intelligence is considered the best intelligence out there. But then Clarke himself also is running around the Mediterranean, sometimes in a dress where he gets picked up in Spain, which photograph everyone knows, because he goes undercover, and sometimes he goes undercover in a dress because he's a cross-dresser. So yeah, that all goes on. And by the time you get to 43 and the invasion of Sicily, Clarke is really running the whole deception operation for what is the Mediterranean side of what becomes Bodyguard. So Bodyguard eventually is the invasion of Europe in Normandy. But prior to that, we invade Sicily. And Clarke runs that deception from early 1943 all the way through to 1944. And it's all based on the things he created before. It's all based on the creation of the SAS, his tank units, which led to the creation of the 12th Army, and his ability to subliminally place in the minds of the enemy commanders, Hitler and Mussolini, that we're doing stuff we're not going to do.
Fascinating. So Clarke, he obviously is keeping himself extremely busy throughout the rest of the war then, isn't he?
Yeah, and he is the master of deception. I think what has happened, and I think maybe why my book is a bit revelatory, is a lot of his plays, a lot of his operations have come out. So, you've got Operation Mincemeat, you've got I Was Monty's Double, to name two things. They are all part of Clarke's much bigger deceptions. And the reason we don't know this whole story about Clarke is because he was sworn to secrecy after the war. He was not allowed. Yeah. He wanted to write a book called The Secret War, but he wasn't allowed to write it. And so all you have is these piecemeal revelations, bit by bit, drip fed into the public domain. And you never get the whole picture of how he was operating, how he integrated special forces and deception, and then how he deceived the Germans. So a lot of the assessments are wrong. So, I'd argue, and this is a little bit controversial, a lot of what's attributed to Mincemeat should be attributed to an operation called Barclay, which is Clarke's much bigger fake army and fake invasion force, which is going to invade the Balkans, which drew German and Italian forces away from Sicily.
Absolutely brilliant. No, so yeah, Clarke is I often think as well, he's an underrated character in that sense, isn't he? Because like you said, he's sworn to secrecy. So, and for being someone who's so, theatrical, it must have really killed him not to be able to tell this, the grand opera, his grand story. It must have been a real
Yes, I think he was. It definitely did, because if you read in his letters and his post-war, he gets frustrated because you can see when the Mincemeat story comes out. It's written by Ewan Montague. It's called The Man Who Never Was, which then turned into film. That comes out, and then you have the guy who he actually cast. So he cast this actor to play Monty. Clarke did that. David Niven, who incidentally David Niven was in the Commandos, and Clarke recruited David Niven into the Commandos, as he said, because he was the least army type of person he could have got. and Niven was very active in the Commandos. Yeah, I remember Niven getting a bit of a hard time because I think he somehow implied he might have been the SS, but he was definitely in Special Forces. He was part of one of Clarke's people. And so Niven was the person who rang up the actor and said, I need you to secretly play General Montgomery. And the actor accepted the role. That actor was then allowed to write a book, and then that became a film. So Clarke's got all this going on, and then he was approached quite late in the day. So towards the end of his life, he was approached by a Hollywood producer to reveal the Cheese story, to basically write up Cheese. So the guy I talked about, the fake, I would say, I'd argue probably he was the biggest agent the British had in the war, because he ran from 1940 through to probably when Rome fell. He was definitely the main player in deception in the Mediterranean. But he was approached to do that, and he quoted a fee and a percentage cut of the project, which because I work in the film industry, basically says, get lost. It's an FU number. I don't want to do that. But at the same time, he then offered for free to write up the script, or the story that could become the script, for the whole of his deception operation. So as he said, rather than do this silly Hollywood movie, why don't we write down the whole thing? So before his death, he was prepared to do it. And in fact, after his death, his sister went looking for the book that she thought he'd written, called The Secret War. Now, whether that book does or doesn't exist is debatable. My opinion, it doesn't. I think he only ever wrote the pitch for it, and I've done a lot of digging. What he did write is something called the A-Force Diary, and obviously he published Seven Assignments, which was a book that took up to 1940, but that's where it ends. I don't think he ever wrote the whole thing down, which is a pity, because it would have been a very good book.
No, absolutely. That would have been fascinating, especially, Clarke's eccentric writing a book like that would have been.
Yeah. You want the person who did it writing it. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Well, Tom, it's been a fast hour. I mean, that's absolutely flew by, and I know you're a very, very busy man yourself. So I will let you go in a second. Do you want to just tell people where they can find you and your stuff out there if they want to, read more and dig into more of this incredible story?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So the book's out in it just came out in paperback. It's called Speed, Aggression, Surprise: The Secret Origins of the SAS. I think you can get that. I hate to say get on Amazon, but you definitely get Amazon, and a lot of independent shops. I've got to shout out to independent booksellers, been very supportive of this. So thank you very much, all of the bookshops around me and around the UK. And then, if you want to keep up with me generally, just go. I mean, the best place, just go on my website, which is tompetch.com. And obviously, I do film things, so I've got film projects ongoing, and hopefully some history films coming out fairly soon, or not. They take a long time. But anyway, there will be other stuff coming. And perhaps, you never know, another book that's also in the pipeline. But no, thanks very much, Jake. It's been a really interesting chat. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. Thanks for coming on. Like I said, it's been great talking to you, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I'll be back very soon, and definitely go and check out Tom's work because it is superb. We'll see you all very soon on the next one. Cheery bye.
Thanks.